Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
All right, welcome back everyone to another edition of Simple Living High Thinking. We are now live on Facebook and YouTube, and welcome. Thank you for tuning in and joining. So we are unpacking every week the Bhagavad Gita class from our teacher Tukaram Prabhu, and there will be a link to his most recent lecture, which would be May 15th, in the details of the post here. So Varangi, would you like to set the stage for where we are right now? We just started chapter 3 last night.
Yeah. So we'll do a brief recap of chapter 1 and chapter 2, just like in a flowy mood, just so for those of you that are just joining us today can have an understanding of where we're standing now. So the Bhagavad Gita, it takes place, it's a conversation that takes place in a battlefield where two sides are fighting and both sides are part of the same family. Arjuna, who's one of the main characters, is actually on the good side, the Pandavas, and he's fighting against his family members who are part of the Kauravas. So again, both families, both sides are part of one big clan. And so Arjuna has to fight to save the world. And he takes a moment to realize this, the fact that he has to fight against his family. And he actually is shaken by that reality. He has a panic attack, a physical, reaction to this realization, this difficult realization. And then that panic attack develops into an existential crisis. He's a great warrior. He's an amazing, has amazing character, a man of integrity, honor, loyalty, just like everything that, all the qualities that we all aspire to develop, Arjuna has. And he's also very spiritually elevated as well. And so during this moment, he ponders the nature of family, duty, sin, karma, which is action and reaction. And then he comes to a decision that he doesn't really want to fight, that it's not worth it to him. And he goes through these amazing series of arguments that are very sound, very logical. They make a lot of sense. As a first-time reader, we all agreed that we were like, how is the Gita gonna even go on? Like, he's so right, like that's true. And so he obviously is a very intelligent person as well. And so that concludes chapter 1. He decides not to fight. Once we start chapter 2, that's when Krishna comes in and he starts just poking at Arjuna a little more, and pointing at the things that are just a little hard to hear as a student, I guess, but even just like from somebody that we care about. And so Krishna starts in an antagonizing way, motivating Arjuna to get up and fight because he's a warrior, right? And so we see through this little introduction of the second chapter, the value of mentorship and guru or a teacher, how sometimes during difficult situations and through a little bit of, a lot of discomfort, we see a lot of growth. But also we see how for Arjuna, what he's focused on is the truth, not so much being right. And so it's this seeker of truth no matter what. And in this moment of crisis, we see how that's gonna take place. And so at the beginning of the second chapter, Arjuna then takes shelter, asks for help from Krishna as a teacher. And he tells Krishna, let me know what I need to do because I have no idea which way is up. I'm confused. And that's when Krishna starts out by laying out Sankhya, which is just a way to categorize things in life. And the most basic way is Krishna is explaining the difference between matter and spirit, and that we are not the body. And then he introduces the idea of how this knowledge that you're not the body, the difference between matter and spirit, how that can transform our life, or how that takes place in our life. And this is Buddhi Yoga. And that's the harmonization between the knowledge and the action, or knowledge and yoga action. And so Krishna lays out that we actually need to do our duty, be in this world, act in this world, but in order to not be entangled in it, we need to not be attached to the results. And then Arjuna asks Krishna to paint a picture, to describe what kind of person, what is that person that has developed that transcendental mentality and consciousness? How does he speak? What does he look like? How does he move in the world? And so Krishna goes into details about the characteristics, or descriptions of such a person, right? And so that's it in a gist, just very broad strokes on the second chapter. And like Kim mentioned, last night we started the third chapter, and pretty much Arjuna is just coming back with another question for Krishna, which is, well, I'm a little confused. Which one is better? You said that intelligence is good, but then which one is better, intelligence or karma yoga or action? Can you please just tell me which one of the two? Because what you've said so far, I'm not really clear. It's not really clear to me. And so that's where we start, and where we left off actually last night. And yeah, that's the recap as of right now.
Nice, thank you. Very, very good. So what were your guys' thoughts from last night's class? Any realizations that you were pondering since then, or that you'd like to share?
So yesterday, being the first text of chapter 3, starts with Arjuna asking, "O Janardana, O Keshava," which are just two names that Arjuna is using to refer to Krishna, Janardana and Keshava. So the very first text of chapter 3, Arjuna says, "O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want to engage me in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than furtive work?" So Arjuna, like Varangi just mentioned, is a very qualified warrior with many qualities, both spiritual and I guess you can say material, in terms of being an honorable man in the material world. And what Krishna has just covered in chapter 2 is actually pretty clear, and Krishna never really sent mixed messages to Arjuna. He was pretty clear in his instruction that you are not the body, you are the spirit. So with that intelligence, you act in a way where you do your duty, but you're not attached to the results, but you should act. So my first realization in chapter 3, which again, yesterday we didn't cover much. We went really text 1 and 2, I believe. That's it. Right there in text 1, it shows that Arjuna is bewildered really with no reason. Because again, Krishna never really sent equivocal messages. Krishna was pretty clear on his instructions to Arjuna on chapter 2. So my realization is that why then is Arjuna asking this question? Hey, which one of the two is better? As if Krishna wasn't clear, which is not the case. Krishna was very, very clear. If we read chapter 2, we all understand, because we are in the audience, right? We are just watching the game. We're not participating in the game. So then with a calm mind as students, we can see and we can realize that, wait a minute, but Krishna wasn't sending mixed messages. So my realization is that oftentimes in the material world, when we get bewildered, just like Arjuna was, we really lose our intelligence. And Krishna mentioned even in chapter 2, that with attachment come lust, with lust come anger, with anger comes bewilderment, with bewilderment comes loss of memory, and when you lose your memory, you lose your intelligence. And then when you lose your intelligence, you're essentially lost for good, right? You're doomed to commit many mistakes, sinful activities, which is going to keep you entangled in this cycle of birth and death in the material world, which for a spiritualist is the worst thing that can happen. So my point is, Krishna had already mentioned that when you are bewildered, you're not very intelligent because your state of mind is very agitated, and the knowledge you have, spiritual teachings, even material, honorable intelligence you may have, in that state of bewilderment, in that state of anger, those things are not really there for us. And we're acting essentially on an animalistic instinct to just defend and attack. And my realization is that when we find ourselves in that situation, it is really the time where we have to control our senses. And what I mean by that situation is a situation of bewilderment, like a conflict at work, with your family, with your friends, or whatever it may be, any kind of dispute, any kind of, let's say, fight, arguments, heavily heated arguments. In that state, it's really for us to do our best to control our senses and to not really say much, to actually be as quiet as possible. Because at that moment, we are not the best of ourselves. That is not the best version of ourselves. That's when we really need to be calm and peaceful. And if anything, just wait on the things that we would say to the person that we are arguing with. Let one day pass, sit on it, contemplate it, think about it with a cool head, and then you act. Because in a state of anger, in a state of bewilderment, when we act, when we say stuff, it's always going to get worse because we are speaking and acting out of anger. And it's just going to make a bad situation even worse. So their realization is that if Arjuna, which is extremely highly qualified from essentially any angle of judgments we could put him through, was bewildered to the point where he couldn't even understand exactly what Krishna was saying, even though Krishna was super clear, then what to speak of us, less evolved spiritual and material beings. So the realization is that, hey, the best of the men here as Arjuna can get bewildered to that point. So then it's a signal to us, let's be cool-headed when we are being tested by anger and hate with the challenges of the material world. And really take a step back, be calm, be cool-headed, consult with our teachers, ask for guidance, and then you act. Because by acting in a state of anger, things will get worse.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, it's so hard to control anger. Anger is such a go-to emotion, at least for me. I know it's, yeah, it's one of those things like, oh, where did that come from? I'm supposed to be so evolved at this point in my life. So yeah, it's interesting to see Arjuna, who is such, as you said, an elevated being, succumb to anxiety, like at the beginning of the Gita, as Varangi said in chapter 1, anxiety, or even now, he's bewildered, he's confused. Krishna just seemingly answered the question that he asked again in chapter 3. It's like, was he not paying attention? But then we realize, oh, he's human just like us. And yeah, it makes Arjuna to me very relatable.
Correct.
Yeah, you guys touched on really good points. Thank you for that. One of the things that I really liked about your realization, Soza, is that it really reminds me of what we've been hearing ever since we started on this path, which is how a real spiritual tradition is one which teaches you how to practically put into practice all these lessons, so these timeless lessons and wisdom and books, they're not meant just for you to pick up on one day out of the week because that's what everybody else is doing on that certain day, but it's actually meant for taking those lessons and really applying them to your life and like trying them out and making changes. And what you brought up about really taking the time to cool down when we're under pressure or we're going through a difficult crisis is it's so practical. And these are things that I actually never thought were possible before I started trying to control my mind and meditate and work with my breath and all these other things. I actually thought that I was my feelings and my emotions and my thoughts. And we've talked about this in other episodes that we've had, but it really is a topic that keeps coming up. I think it will continue to come up even past the Gita and into other scriptures, also books that come up. It's this point of how important it is for us to be aware of who we actually are as spiritual beings, but also how connected we are to our subtle body, which is our mind, and how if we don't actually practice this control daily, you know, through our spiritual practice of chanting, reading, associating with other people that are doing the same thing, it's really impossible. And we'll see actually how Arjuna brings up these points as this conversation evolves. And so that was one thing that really stood out to me. The other thing is, I mean, this is something that Tukram Prabhu brought up last night, which was, it's so amazing how the Bhagavad Gita actually follows the structure of the most ancient of texts, which is one of them, it's the Upanishads, which is based on questions and answers. And so we see here how the structure is not just, we don't see the student just taking everything that the teacher says and just swallowing whole, so to speak. But we see how Arjuna is actually working really hard to understand these concepts and is really not afraid to ask questions. And obviously when he still doesn't get it, he goes back on the table and poses the same doubt, but in a different way, because he still hasn't understood it. And I appreciated the fact that you brought up the point that if this is him, who is such an advanced personality, you know, super processed in a way, right? Was to speak of me. And I'm just thinking, you know, I've been reading this text specifically for about a decade. And every time I pick it up, it's like, oh, I didn't catch that. Oh, I forgot. Or yeah, I remember that this is such a big topic or a big deal, and it just didn't stick with me. And so it really brings it, yeah, I guess it's relatable, but it also, it's confronting and a little like, it shook me up, because it's like, wow, these are actually lessons that are meant to go deep, but also simultaneously with my own work. It's not just like the wisdom comes in and goes deep and then that's it, you're self-realized just on one sitting, you know? It's like you get the wisdom, but it only goes as deep as you're doing your work as well. And I thought that was really wonderful. I really appreciated that point that Tukram brought up, which is, you know, the questions and answers, but from previous classes, remembering that we also have to do our part, like Arjuna's doing. And he's coming on the table and Krishna's there, you know? And so I wanted to share that.
And that's great, thank you. And another point in terms of reactions to anger, which again is quite dangerous. I was in a temple lecture once, and the teacher was explaining this very principle of how to deal with anger when it comes up, and hate and so on. And one student in the audience asked the question, but it's so difficult to control anger. So give me a practical example how to do it. And the teacher answered in such an expert way, which, you know, really got to me. And she used the method that essentially Krishna is using throughout Gita, which is to first give some philosophy so that we understand, like, philosophically, what are we talking about? And then a practical, okay, now this is how you do it, this philosophy that we just talked about, right? Urmila Dasi was the teacher here. And she first explained from a scientific perspective, which was so eye-opening to me, what happens when we experience anger. And it was the following. So imagine that you are distracted and you're crossing the street and there's a car coming, but because you were distracted, you didn't realize. And somebody yells out, hey, be careful, watch out. And then when you look, you see that car. It's really not you thinking, oh, then let me jump back as fast as I can because my life is in danger. It's really a spontaneous instinct reaction that takes control over you. It is not you going to the mental process, oh man, if this car hits me, it's really gonna hurt, you know, like, so I better jump out as fast as possible. That thought process is not going on in your mind. You simply just jump back, and that's instinct. That's not controlled by you. It just happens automatic. It's instinct, right? Just that's it, it's an instinct. And along with that reaction comes, and what causes your body to actually move is hormones that your brain produces, because your brain realizes you are in physical danger and you have to act, and then you jump. But all that is not under your control. All that is happening automatically. And really what causes you to act is that hormone that your brain produces. Well, then she pointed out that when we find ourselves in a psychological threatening situation, which is to say, let's say you're having an argument with a colleague at work or with a family member or somebody, and you feel threat with your social position, that's a psychological threat. For your brain, there's actually no distinction in terms of the danger that your being is under, which is to say the physical danger that your brain perceives and causes you to act is the same as if somebody comes to you and say, for example, I'm trying to paint a picture here. So let's say you are at work and something really bad happened and you are not even part of that. And let's say, again, I'm coming up with a scenario here, right? So let's say that something bad happened. If your boss finds out, whoever did it is going to get fired, right? And then let's say the person who actually did that comes and confirms you and your boss and other colleagues and says a lie. Oh, it was Varangi who did it, right? But you know it wasn't you, it was that person. So at that point, your social being is being threatened. It's a psychological danger. Your brain reacts in the exact same way, as if it was a physical thing about to happen to you. And it produces those hormones, which is really the impulse that bubbles up anger, right? In that scenario. And then what do? We act. It is not really us. It's an animal instinct that just starts speaking. No, wait a minute, I didn't do it, it was this. And then it cursing words will come because you're trying to defend yourself. So that defense mechanism is triggered by these hormones that our brain produces. And there's really no distinction whether it is a social, psychological threat or an actual physical threat, which is to say that that impulse to react and defend and attack, it is just as strong when you're jumping out of the car's way as it is when you are verbally attacking somebody. You're not really doing it. You know, it's just like an automatic mechanism that comes through, and you're going to regret. You know, if you don't control yourself, if you just let your emotions get the best out of you and anger just control you and dominate you, you're just going to say a whole bunch of stuff that you're going to regret later to people that you may love even. And it's not going to be a good outcome. That's how fights escalate so quickly, you know? And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that because to me, that is very related to the concept that we are not the body, we are the soul. And all these reactions are bodily reactions. This is like scientific brain producing hormone type of experiments that we can see, you know? So with the understanding that we are not the body, hopefully we are able to really step back and say, okay, these are just emotional reactions right now. This is just anger. This is not really me. I am able to stay behind it and not act, you know? So I thought it was so expert of her to explain, to give some philosophy, some intelligence, some knowledge of what's going on in the moment of anger, you know, because it's just an animalistic reaction. It's not really us. And then again, now how do you act is that way, right? You realize, okay, I am not this anger. I don't necessarily have to give in to this impulse of defending and attacking. And you, just like you mentioned, Veronica, you know, you take a deep breath. The deep breath thing is deep in our tradition, you know. It's a big part of yoga. If you control your breath, you can control your mind. If you control your mind, you have intelligence at your disposal. So taking a deep breath is far beyond cliche. It's really powerful. It's really scientific. It's really helpful. It calms your mind and it allows you to realize I am not that mind which is under anger right now. So from that philosophy, from that intelligence, from that understanding to then acting in a way that take a deep breath, take 2 deep breaths, take 3 deep breaths, but don't act, don't say, because the stuff that is going to come out is animalistic and we're going to regret.
So true. Wow.
Yeah, that's such an interesting distinction about us not knowing the ultimate difference between, oh, a physical threat or, you know, an emotional threat, which explains completely why we get so worked up in the anger. I know for me, confrontation, you know, when it comes to fight or flight, I'm definitely a flight person. And so with confrontation, my use of anger has frequently been to present a bigger defense, like, oh, you can't take advantage of me when, and it's all so reactionary, you know. And now I found, like in the past year or even 6 months, anger has subsided a lot. And a lot of that has to do with the friends and community that I'm around, where I don't have to pose such a big presence for myself of, you know, put anger first when I feel threatened or so. So I think association makes such a huge difference.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. One other thing I liked from Tukram Prabhu's class last night was, okay, he said we should have empathy for Arjuna because he's going through a difficult time like all of us. And, you know, yes, Krishna went through a lot of the same, went through multiple answers of the same question in the previous chapters, and he still had a similar question in the 3rd chapter. And Tukram Prabhu pointed out that we want teachers and gurus who always see the best in us and who don't forsake us in our time of need. And for Krishna, Tukram Prabhu even said that at the end of the Gita, you know, if Arjuna needed to hear the entire Gita, all those lessons again, Krishna would have started from the beginning and done it again. So that really moved me about the role of a teacher and being able to take shelter and being able to freak out and, you know, get spun out, and having a teacher or a guru be able to guide us in those moments.
Yeah. I also was really impacted by that specific point. And something that I was thinking in my own life is, well, I know those types of teachers are there. Like, they're definitely, those are my teachers, right? The people that will not turn their back on me. They'll just walk with me through the darkest of moments and will just be super patient as I foolishly kind of wallow in my weirdness or doubt. And yeah, in those moments of anger and bewilderment and loss of intelligence and all those things. But it was really bringing up the point of, it really requires me to be a student like Arjuna, you know, to be so vulnerable and honest. Like, he was just laying it out, and he was just like, hey, this is where I'm at, and I don't get it. Like, what are you saying? You're not saying, you're being equivocal. Like, it's so wonderful to see that Arjuna's getting the guidance he needs, but it's really because that sincerity and that truthfulness, that, I guess, that commitment to truth is there from his side. And it's like, I know I've heard it a lot from my teachers, that it's so inspiring when they're speaking and people are like paying attention. ready to learn, ready to receive that wisdom and hold it. And then that they see those students putting things into practice, sharing it with other people, even if, you know, we're not perfect at it, but just going through that practice, you know, it really goes deep. And this particular point really ties into how, because anger is also actually, it's like my defense mechanism. It's my go-to for anything before I can feel sadness or any other emotion. Anger is like my gate emotion. So when I was hearing from Sosa and also from your feedback on some of the points that were brought up about this specific point about anger and how to practically work with it, I was thinking that it's so important to do this work before the emergency happens. So if we start this process of like breath work, but also like just learning the knowledge that we're not our body and all these other things, and even just like instead of reacting to a situation, just like taking it slow and like sitting with the pain or sitting with the anger or sitting with whatever emotion, and you just start practicing all those things before a triggering moment happens, it really goes such a long way. And something that I've heard a lot, especially from my husband's in firefighting training right now, and this is something I really appreciate about him because it's something that he shares with me a lot. It's not only just like in a fire, but just in any situation, when you learn how to do things properly before you're in that emergency situation, you have way more chances of coming out successful after that happens. And it fully makes sense. I think, you know, self-defense teachers also teach this. Anything like that that you want to practice or master, they always focus on highlighting how important it is to set out or to start practicing this with ahead of time, without any pressure, without any other like difficult situations, so you can get some bearings on it. So when the real test comes around, we could have more of a knee-jerk reaction, more of an instinctual reaction, but a positive one. And that will eventually override that lower nature reaction that we have been trained to I guess, take out in those difficult situations. And I, like you, Kim, I've also seen a huge transformation just in the last few months, just from being aware of this, of being aware of where I'm at and what are my like pathways, I guess, like the ways that I react to things, and then practicing a little bit of that outside of triggering situations. And then when those low points in life come through, because they're sure to come through, when they do come through, then I'm able to respond in a healthier way. But there's no way that would happen if you're not practicing that ahead of time or behind the scenes, right? Mm-hmm. And it takes a little bit of commitment to be able to do that, I think, and not giving up, and also realizing that the first time around or the first few times, it might be that we don't do the best job possible, but it's just sticking to that and continuing to I guess solidify those new habits and those new actions and ways of thinking and acting.
So I have a question, Varangi. You talking about practicing, and this is something that I highly agree, and I'm going to be forced to make a basketball reference here. Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant is probably the most noticeable players for being so into practicing and putting the work in, having the Mamba mentality, right? And oftentimes they were both asked, like, hey, you know, taking the last shot with 1 second in the clock to win the game or to win the championship, there's like a whole lot of pressure. How do you feel about that? And their answers have always been the same. It's like, you know, no pressure at all. And then it's like, well, how come? Like, what do you mean no pressure? And their answers were always like, you know, I have literally, not figuratively, but literally, I have shot this shot that I've been asked to shoot right now over 10,000 times, like in the past few months. You know, I have done this thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So now that I'm going to do it again, is mechanical. It's completely available for me because I have practiced so many times, and I'm confident. I know I can do it, and I'm just going to do it again. And oftentimes they did it, you know, and that pressure didn't faze them at all, you know. So to me, this is very practical. I have, you know, spent over decades playing basketball and practicing in that way, and I know how to do that. But my question is to you is, but how do we practice controlling ourselves when anger arises? Because you seem to me that I would at least need, if anything, a minor situation that would trigger my anger, and then I would have to like try to control myself. How do I practice controlling my anger?
Well, you gave us that answer already, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to reiterate what you have already so expertly explained. Well, and I think this is something so real in my life, so it's easier to go through that. And what you just said, it's such a great example. It's so true. We see that in a material, you know, in our material lives. So it's as easily transferable into our spiritual life as well. At least for me, and I think this is something that if it works for me, I'm sure it can work for a lot of people, since my anger issues are quite prominent in my personality. So yeah, I think it's getting that knowledge first. That's the first step, is being aware of what you struggle with. I don't think that everybody has an anger issue. I don't think that everybody has anger as their first defense mechanism or their first reaction to things. I certainly do. So just being aware of the fact that, hey, this is my challenge or my obstacle, one of the main obstacles in life. Being aware of it is the first step. Second step is learning, you know, from people that specialize in these things, or teachers, yes, but even just therapists, self-help, you know, books, techniques. Yoga is super helpful. Yoga was really actually really helpful for me. I started doing yoga teacher training like 3 years ago, and that's really when I started connecting more mindfully to my breath, and I realized that I had a lot more control over my emotions than I thought, because I could physically slow down my heart rate and physically slow down my mind in moments where my instant reaction was to not want to do something or not like it. And so I think that if you start taking different tools from different practices and see how you can incorporate that into reacting in a healthier way to that particular thing that you struggle with, which we're talking about anger right now. So let's just use that as an example. I think that you have a higher probability of doing better each time that thing comes up, each time anger comes up. And so for me, I am not at all successful all the times, but what I have seen the difference is that now I'm aware of the fact that I can go there really easily, that I don't want to go there as easily anymore, and that I'm surrounded by people that actually love me and care about me, and they are also aware of those struggles. And so I no longer see those people, and usually really the people that comes out with the most is my family members and my husband, because they're the people that are around me all the time, so they get the good and the bad, right? And so now I'm starting to understand that they're not my enemies, that they're not somebody that's out to get me, or somebody that's trying to put me down, or somebody that's like trying to get one on me or anything. They're actually like genuinely care about me and they love me. And so when something triggering happens, I'm no longer as interested in reacting, although that feeling is still there. But now I have some knowledge that, well, why am I getting so upset? What's really bothering me right now? Okay, well, this isn't really who I am. Like, I don't have to give in. There's actually that reaction time between something that happens to you and when you react. That little space is the only power you have over anything. And so it's like, that's when you can actually use your free will. And so understanding this, and this is something that I also heard from Tukram the first time around, from an author. I don't know if you guys remember. He was a Jewish kid in a concentration camp, and what's his name? But he wrote.
Meaning is the title of the book.
What was it?
The title of the book, I think, is Man's Search for Meaning.
Is it? Okay. I don't remember the title of the book, nor his name. I'll have it for next time. But in this book, and Tukram was talking about this, he explains how he realized that the Nazis, although he couldn't control what they were doing to them in the concentration camps, he realized that he had full control over how he would react to those things. And in that way, he actually was free. And so that was amazing. And that's something that stuck with me a lot. And it continues to help me through this path of not reacting to everything that comes up, either mentally or physically in my life, because there's always going to be something that I like or dislike. And so this is something that we heard Krishna laying out for Arjuna, this process of being able to detach ourselves from the objects of the senses, and how somebody that's able to stay steady in happiness and distress is somebody that's actually situated on transcendence. And I mean, that's it. I think that that's actually the process by which we could practically start controlling those emotions or those not so good reactions, and instead of letting them control us. And I think that that's really where we are able to see the power of intelligence. And when intelligence is really situated on a spiritual platform, how intelligence is the one controlling everything else, all the senses, the mind. But when the intelligence is not situated, then the opposite happens.
I like you brought intelligence back up, because we ended up talking about anger a lot. But the main point here to relate back to Gita is that in chapter 2, Krishna said, when all these negative emotions come up, really what happens is that you lose your intelligence. And then because you're really bewildered. So we spoke about anger, but what triggered Arjuna to be bewildered was this resentment, like he didn't want to do it, right? He felt, how can I counteract with arrows people that I love? And in that state, he got bewildered. Fear, if we are fearful of something, that is going to bewilder us. If we're angry, we're going to be bewildered. So all these negative emotions will bewilder us. And that bewilderment is what is going to cause us to lose our intelligence. And then when we lose our intelligence, we act in this very poor way. And, we focused on anger today, but fear, hate, lust, anger, all of these things is what causes us to be bewildered. And then our intelligence is not there.
That's right. Yeah. It's Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I was going to bring that up.
That's it. Yeah, that's so true what you're saying. And I mean, this really reminds me of 266, verse 66 in the Gita, where Krishna's talking about how there's no way that we could find happiness without peace. Mm-hmm. And so it really just ties it in, because that's really what everybody's looking for. It's like, who's not looking to be happy? Everybody is looking to be happy. But actually, we can't be happy without being peaceful. And we can't be peaceful unless we control our senses. It's like so clear, right? Exactly. It's like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have heard this like 1,000 years ago. But it's like, I wasn't ready to hear that. And even if I would have heard it, I probably wouldn't have done anything with it, because I just wasn't ready for that. That was just another thought I had about it. But yeah, it's powerful. So peace is a prerequisite for happiness. And, being in this world, we all so often hear, do this for peace. feed the hungry for peace, all these things for peace. But it's like, I never hear somebody saying, control your senses for peace.
Yes.
But that's actually like how we get peaceful. And then only when we're peaceful, then that's when we can connect with each other in a real deep way and really see a transformation in our life.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond any situation we might find ourselves in externally, or even the people that we are surrounded by. Like, you could be anywhere, but if you have that peace, internal peace, then you could be happy. That's insane. That's like, and this is only the second chapter.
That's an excellent point. And I just want to have one last comment to something that Kim mentioned. That, Kim, you said that Tukaram pointed out the good teacher that Krishna is he's having a lot of empathy for Arjuna, because Arjuna is not in his best, right? And that kind of moved you. So I wanted to also relate that to us, to what we're discussing here, because I think that our conversation thus far has been, if we are the ones that would otherwise act in an angry state of mind, and what can we do to control ourselves, right? But if we were to flip it, let's say we're not the bewildered person, but the person that is confronting us are, right? Then what do we do? And I think the very same thing applies for us to be aware that the vast majority of people are not aware of the fact that they are not their bodies and minds. And they are actually attacking you out of their animalistic instincts. And when I say animalistic here, is not derogatory. It's to really phrase, it's really an animal instinct. It's not us doing it by human intelligence. It's an instinct to defend ourselves, you know? So Kim, you brought it up that Arjuna, that Krishna was having compassion or empathizing with Arjuna because Arjuna wasn't in his best, because he was bewildered. So I think that was a very good point you brought up, Kim. And we too can do that, right? If somebody's acting towards us in a very poor manner, that we can understand that, well, yeah, they're going through the exact same things that I have gone through so many times. They are in that position where, unfortunately, they're not able to distinguish that they are not this brain-induced hormones that are causing them to act in this very poor way towards me and attacking me. And I can be aware of that to even help me more to remain peaceful, you know? So on the other side of things, we can also recognize that people are acting in a bewildered way. We don't have to necessarily even defend ourselves. Oftentimes they're attacking us on things that are not even true. So we can just kind of sit there, remain calm, and having, in one sense that you pointed out that Krishna was having for Arjuna, having the empathy, you know, not from a point of view of arrogance, that, oh, I am better than this person because I'm such a self-realized yogi, spiritual person, and I can control my mind and senses, and this poor, low-class human being, you know, they're like, all they're losing them. Not from that point of view. From a real empathy, like really having compassion and understanding. This is something that impacts everybody. And that person is unfortunately going through this now. You know, it can help us have empathy and compassion for others as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's my personal opinion that with more intelligence, with more knowledge about these things, even though we're not perfect in every situation, I think we have more accountability to attempt to be more controlled in that situation when someone is coming at us. So yeah. Well, we are nearing the end of our time. So did you guys want to have any closing comments or any other closing thoughts before we sign off?
Well, my closing thoughts are that, again, yesterday we only covered text 1 of Bhagavad Gita, and to me it's already impressive that we can spend, 45 minutes talking about that one verse here. Obviously, it's coming from the Supreme Person through Tukaram's unpacking of that. So I'm not really surprised, but it is amazing. Like, it's one of the reasons why Bhagavad Gita being Tukaram students is such a honor, you know, and so amazing, because we can spend all this time talking about one verse. But my closing marks is that I can't wait for next class, because of this chapter 3. It's really practical. You know, it's really Krishna laying out, like, how do you act? You know, like, what do you do in the material world with the philosophical understanding of your spiritual nature? You know, Krishna is going to elaborate on this a lot in this chapter 3. So I'm very excited for that.
Thank you. I feel the same way. I guess something that I wanted to share to close this episode was, and it's related to your last comment about reaction, like I'm sorry, let me get my thoughts together. I get so excited about these topics. It's like, where do I start? But one thing that that I appreciated was you bringing up understanding where other people are coming from, and that they could also be reacting out of, I guess, their lower natures, but not from a righteous perspective or point of view, like, oh, I'm so evolved and you're like in the modes, not like that, but just really from a compassionate point. It really helped me remembered the fact that all the hard times that we go through, all the hardships, all the things that we suffer through are really an opportunity for us to develop that compassion, because at some point, once we have worked through that ourselves, we can then help other people that are going to go through the same stuff. And so I appreciated this point, because oftentimes I tend to think about my bad moments as like, oh, this is a misfortune, you know, it sucks, like, I can't believe this is happening. Or even just people that I love, like, I'm so sorry they're going through this. But I tend to not realize that this is actually a beautiful opportunity for them and for myself to develop this compassion, which is so necessary to help avoid us going down that road of, oh, I'm going to be the bigger person, you know, and kind of do that. And we see that a lot in spiritual circles or traditions, where you have somebody pointing the finger and telling other people to be a certain way, but they're not really connecting to that, or they don't really walk that talk. And so, yeah, this point of taking hardships, taking those times of suffering to really develop that compassion that will then enable us to become assistants or helpers when somebody else is going through the same thing. It's so powerful. And I really felt that I got that from the first verse of the 3rd chapter, because when I first read that, I was like, what? Didn't he just hear Krishna? Like, that was so clear. Like, what were you doing, you know, Arjuna? It's like, it really hit me hard. Like, wow, that compassion of, like, I'm always bewildered. What am I talking about? And it's because of those times of crisis that I am now able to some extent, be able to relate to other people that are going through the same thing and really be there for them. And that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, like, I really do feel so grateful for that. So yeah, I wanted to end with that thought of being grateful for those difficult times, the difficulties, because they're really an opportunity for us to grow our compassion and empathy. And remembering that we're still students, and we're going to be students for life. As long as we have wonderful teachers, which we do, then we have, you know, the sky is the limit. There's no limit to growth. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Farangi, and thank you, Tadeo. Yeah, this conversation today was such a good reminder of how the Gita is such a practical handbook, guidebook for life in 2020. So yeah, I'm looking forward to next class too, as well. All right, so thank you everyone for tuning in, those who tried out the live streaming and those tuning into the podcast. We will include links, like I said, to Tukram Prabhu's lecture, and you can also check us out or contact us on our website at simplelivinghighThinking.net. So thank you and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Simple Living High Thinking. Please subscribe as new episodes post every Monday. You can tune into this podcast live every Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Check out our website for more details at simplelivinghighThinking.net. And if you would like to nominate someone for a Devotee Spotlight interview, contact us via our website at simplelivinghighThinking.net.